my grandmother was a slave. Like, it wasn't that long ago.
Hi, everybody. I am so excited to be here with my dear friend, Candace. Candace and I worked together while I was a school teacher. Candace is a school teacher. She's on maternity leave at the moment. She has 3 beautiful daughters and a 4th on the way. And I figured just because of the climate globally of the Black Lives Matter movement and everything that's kind of come to the surface in Australia to do with the mistreatment of Indigenous people, I wanted to just have an open conversation because there were a lot of things that came up and I realized I wasn't really educated. I had a lot of questions. I didn't know where to start. And so Candace and I thought it'd be really great to have a conversation. Now, Candace, just before we start, I wanted to say I'm human. I am a white Australian woman trying to do her best in educating herself. Why am I talking in third person? I'm trying to do the best in educating myself. And I will likely make mistakes. I will likely say the wrong thing. So at any point, if I say something that is incorrect, please interrupt me and correct me, because I want to be the best ally that I can be, and come from a level of deep respect and deep love. I am here as a learner. Like, I want to learn and I want to be better for myself, for my community, for my Indigenous Australian community. So yeah, that's basically it.
No, thank you for making this happen, because I was also really excited when, I reached out to you, when I messaged you to say, like, I see you and thank you for the support. And it just means a lot. So yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that I do appreciate you using your platform to support. Yeah.
Okay, so this came up while I was emailing you. I'm just going to get straight into it. I was emailing you a couple of questions that I wanted to discuss with you. Something that came up for me was that I wasn't sure how to correctly refer to your family, your Indigenous culture, I guess where you came from. I referred to it as your people, and I was like, I don't know if that's right. So can you give me context when I'm referring to your family? How do I refer to your family?
Yeah, no, that's understandable, because like, terminology changes a lot, and I think even I get confused as to what is appropriate, because I've always said Indigenous because that covers Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. And then most recently in school, I've heard that they were changing the terminology to First Nations. So I'm still not sure whether we're like not referring to ourselves as Indigenous or First Nations. And I don't speak on behalf of all Indigenous people in Australia, but I don't mind either. I use both of them. But in regards to where we come from in Australia, it's the country. So the area that we come from is the country. So my country and countrymen are all from North Queensland, Townsville and Cairns. That's the Aboriginal side. And then the Torres Strait Islands, from my grandfather's side, is from Moa Island and Thursday Island. And down here, like, I grew up in New South Wales. I was born in Sydney, raised in Kempsey, a little country town. And then I spent my late high school years in Townsville. But then I ended up in Sydney.
Okay, all right. So as an Indigenous woman, I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Have you ever experienced a racial slur? And if so, can you share what it was?
Yeah. I haven't been personally referred to by many, but I do remember the very few times that I was. In primary school, there was some kids that made up they said that I was an ABC, and I was thinking, like, I don't know what that is, and they were saying that's an Aboriginal bum cleaner, and they'd all laugh, and I was just a bit shocked because that wasn't a thing, and I was only in year 3, and I was hurt because I was like one of 2 Indigenous students in my year level, and I didn't know what to say. I couldn't defend myself, and I just kind of let them laugh and then walk away. But it would hurt me because they would think that was fine to say that. And then when I was in high school, it was particularly just one student in particular who in a class, history class, referred to me as an abo or a petrol sniffer, because we were learning about Indigenous culture. And so the video that we were watching portrayed negative characteristics of Indigenous people. And so like he would turn around to me and say, "Oh, is that what you do on weekends, is it?" And steal cars and sniff petrol. And again, I was the only one in my class, and I was already a very shy student, so I would never speak up anyway, regardless of what the discussion was in class. So yeah, I was a bit disappointed that as an adult and a teacher, looking back now, I was never consoled and the boy never got in trouble. But the teacher was more like, "Oh, just cut it out." And so I think that's part of why I'm so passionate about speaking up now, because I felt like I don't want to sit back and just let slurs or people that can say insensitive comments like that get away with it without me having just a chance to speak up for myself.
Yeah.
And people.
I'm just remembering in that moment, I don't have a lot of memories of learning about Indigenous culture. I feel like in art we did dot paintings, like that is like, if we did learn about it, which I'm sure we did in primary school, it didn't have a lasting effect. It would have been very brief. But I do recall in high school also being exposed to negative stereotypes of Indigenous culture, Indigenous people rather than culture, and not be immersed in Indigenous culture and learning about the magic of it and the beauty of it and the community. As a teacher and as a mum, because I have so many questions, but as a teacher, do you feel that today in Indigenous cultural studies, it's still whitewashed information that's being taught to kids in schools?
I again, like you, I don't remember learning much about it apart from always watching a movie and then a discussion later, and then again doing dot painting for art. But I feel like in today's world, well, having experience being a teacher and looking at the content that in the programs that we had to teach, I was impressed because we looked at a lot of significant Indigenous people of Australia, and I was proud to teach it because I was really involved in it and happy that the kids were learning about these positive role models in our community that represent Indigenous people. Yeah, like it's a big difference from when I was at school. I didn't remember ever learning about anybody apart from Eddie Mabo. That was it. I didn't even know about like David Unipin, who's on the 50 or no. Yeah, like just, I suppose, I don't know whether it was in the program and we touched on it and I just can't remember, but if we did get taught it, I don't remember.
I remember we spent like probably a good 2 weeks on it. And if you're going to spend a good 2 weeks on Captain Cook, you need to balance that with the culture that he invaded and the culture that still exists on our land that we live and breathe on. So yeah, I think there wasn't enough done when I was at school, and I now find myself playing catch up, and as an adult I feel like I have an advantage because I now have access to all of the information instead of being spoon fed by a teacher. And I now have the consciousness to do the research. I know when I was in the classroom a few years ago as a school teacher, I was really excited to teach Indigenous studies, and like I'm sure the kids thought I was crazy. I'm like, guys, isn't this amazing? And I think it came from the fact that I didn't get that education when I was in primary school. As a mum, I'm going to touch on this. As a mum, have you found yourself having to navigate conversation about racism with your daughters? Because how old are your daughters? They're pretty young.
They are 7, 9, and 10.
Okay. Have you had to have a conversation with the girls?
I have. It was about so they've always known their ethnicities because we have quite a lot, and we're proud of all of them. They are Torres Strait Islander, Aboriginal, Māori from New Zealand, and Irish and Scottish and British. So like we have everything, and we always make sure that they know that all of their ethnicities from my side of the family and their dad's side of the family. So they've known about race, and they've just not understood racism until we watched The Greatest Showman. We loved it. We loved it so much. But racism didn't dawn on me until the discussion that I had to have with my children, until Darcy asked, because she realized that in that show that everybody was involved in it because there was something different or abnormal about them. And then she said to me, what's wrong with the black girl and her brother? And I didn't even think about it. And it wasn't until she brought that up, I was like, yeah, there's nothing wrong. Oh, and then I clicked, oh, it's because they're black, and this is the way back in history, because I was watching it with them. I had never seen it before.
Yeah.
It never dawned on me before. And when she said that, I was like, there's nothing wrong with them. They're considered freaks, I guess, because they are of a different skin color, and the rest of the community that's different. And the look on their faces when I said that broke my heart, because it's the first time, like, innocent little minds were thinking like, what? Why would we be different? Because all I could think was, they're thinking now, hey, my skin is that color. Am I a freak? Am I different? Like, do people treat me differently because of that now? Like, and so then I had to kind of pause the movie, and it was hard discussion, because I didn't want to say like, oh, Europeans came and invaded, and I didn't want it to be an angry conversation. I wanted it to be an educational experience, but with the truth. And it was really hard because I wasn't prepared for it. It was almost like them asking, where do babies come from? You just kind of like put on the spot, and I didn't know how to say it in a sensitive way. Yeah. So ever since then, they've known about racism and how people can be treated differently because of skin color. But I can't say that, well, not that I've heard that they've experienced racism. Yeah. Because they have beautiful friends, we have a beautiful school community, but they're very aware of how our Indigenous communities are disadvantaged by things like having less access in rural communities, to education or to good food, water, transport to schools and things like that, or just having that support at home as well. I just want to make them aware of that, and how privileged they are to actually be getting a good education and having a nice house. And I hope I'm not offending other Indigenous people by saying that like we're really well off or something, but I just want them to acknowledge that this is a place where my grandmother and grandfather came from, not having access to education, not having access to freedom, because my grandmother and grandfather were part of the stolen generation. So they were taken at their ages, so 8 years old, away from their families, and were forced to live on a mission to work for free until they were in their 20s, mid-20s. So I'm glad they kind of know the history now and know how lucky we are to have the privileges we do now.
Wow. Yeah, I think it's beautiful how you are helping your daughters see, even with their Indigenous heritage, which does bring with it just a lot of unnecessary disadvantages, that you help them see where they've come from, and then you also help them see that within that they are privileged. Like, their mum is a highly educated school teacher. You live in Western Sydney, which is a super multicultural community. I used to live in Western Sydney. I moved there because I got a job there, and I loved it. I loved the fact that I'm pretty sure I was the only white person in my apartment building, and I was like, oh my gosh, so much culture. I'm obsessed with this. So as a child, doesn't matter what your background is, growing up in Western Sydney, I think is quite an advantage when it comes to the human experience and being able to connect with people of all backgrounds. So I think it's important to note that. But I just wanted to honour and celebrate the fact that you give your children a lens to see their background and their future, and where they stand within that. And I think that's really important. So obviously the last couple of weeks, how has it felt watching a lot of white Australia put up hashtags for George Floyd, put a lot of attention onto the awful stuff that's happening in America, but not really being aware of what's going on in Australia? And I'm grateful that the media is finally sharing, because there are a lot of people who are standing up saying, there are a lot of Indigenous deaths in custody. How does it feel to see white Australia be like, America, Black Lives Matter, and not acknowledge, like, you guys have been fighting for freedom and equality since you were invaded? How does that feel?
To be honest, everybody that I've seen support the George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement in America, I've found is equally supportive of Indigenous Australians and what we are, protesting about as well, and supporting us in our fight for justice here. Just that some, and these are people that weren't supportive of either. This just the comment saying that are a bit of a slap in the face are things like, why are you speaking out now? Why did it take one black guy in America to be murdered for you to want to fight for your justice here? But it's like, well, we always have been, but you've never heard. We've always had protests and campaigns and all of these kind of things to get the word out here, but it obviously hadn't gone that public that many people had heard about it, because so many people are saying, why now? Why do you have to speak up now? Why didn't you do this all these other years? But it was we do this every year, pretty much. So I didn't understand how they didn't know that we were ever fighting for justice.
I am going to be super honest here, and this is a conversation I've had with a couple of my friends, but I saw a quote on Instagram. It was along the lines of, white privilege is not acknowledging that there's a problem because you're not personally connected to it, or you haven't been personally affected. And I realized I spent probably a week just riddled with anxiety and anger and fear because my best friend lives in America and she's Black. And then when I read that quote, I was like, it's like, I need to have as much passion and fire in my belly for my Indigenous friends and their families and the community here as I do about, Black America. And I had to check myself, because I'm like, I have had access to all of this information, but I never took the time to actually sit down and assess and check myself and say, look, are you aware of what's going on? Are you aware enough to go and research? Do you care enough to go and research? And I chose not to educate myself at that stage. And it wasn't until somebody who I care deeply about, I thought, her life is in danger, her family, her uncles, her whoever, everyone she's connected to is being mistreated. And I recognize that actually happens here, and I didn't care enough to use my voice or educate myself. And that was challenging for me, because I'm like, I don't like that about myself. I don't like the fact that I've lived here for 29 years, my whole life, visited Indigenous communities, and still have done nothing. So I'm so grateful that, obviously, I hate what's happening in America, but I'm so grateful that it's kind of woken Australia up to the fact that there are serious injustices here, and we've not acknowledged them and we've ignored them. And I've also, and I'm hoping that a lot of my white Australian friends are able to relate to this, in that I was really overwhelmed when I started reading up articles about Indigenous Australian injustices and everything that's going on, just recognizing I know I've been ignorant, and I know that I haven't done enough to educate myself in the past, but this is where I am, and I am going to use my platform, and I'm going to show up where I can, both physically and just energetically and emotionally and spiritually. But I'm trying to integrate my activism into my online presence. I don't want everything that I post just to be Black Lives Matter, because it's not, it has to be part of my everyday life. It has to be in my thoughts, while I'm working out, while I'm cooking dinner. I'm not just going to drop everything and run after a cause, because I know myself, I will burn out. With everything I've been invested in, it doesn't matter if it's an activist cause or if it's a workout or if it's, and I'm not saying in any way that they're the same thing, but anytime I put my energy towards something new and I drop everything, I'm like, I'm all about this, I burn out. So for me, as somebody who has a platform and who tries to use my voice, to create change, I'm navigating what it looks like to integrate it into my life and silence a lot of the voices that are like, you're posting too many happy photos, there are people dying. And I'm like, but also I'm a joyful person. And I think in amongst all this mess, there should still be joy. There should still be playing, because it's going to be a long road. I wish it wasn't, but we have to stick at it. We can't just be like, let's go to a protest and then 2 months later fall off Yeah.
So that, like you're saying, like the when you embed it just within your day, little bits at a time, it becomes actually more effective, because you're not, like you're doing, you're embedding it into your life. You're not just arriving for the party and then pack up and leave it later and never return to the issue, kind of thing. So it is good, because we do the same thing. Like, that everybody that's been to the protests aren't sitting at home, we're not crying and, things about our situations, and that we go home and have a laugh with our family, but we still are aware that things are, haven't made much of a difference yet. There's still injustices. There's nothing really changed, but we're working towards it as a gradual process to get things happening, get the ball rolling. It's actually influenced so many people. Well, so many people that I know, Indigenous people that I know, to just do as much as we can in our own communities. Like, I have been, especially now being on maternity leave and having so much more free time, I just wanted to do more. Like, what, instead of, like, because I didn't go to the protests, I wanted to be able to do something. And so I was looking even into joining a political party in my area, so that I have more of a voice in my community. Or like just researching all the stereotypical questions that on social media we try so hard. It's like we need like a whole team of people, admin team, going on and replying to educate all these people. It feels like a full-time job, because I honestly felt like all I did all day was stay on my phone trying to explain to people who didn't understand it. It was draining, like holding my tongue and just calmly trying to educate, because that's what I do. I like to educate people, and I know that all of these misconceptions is just because of miseducation. That's all it is. So I was taking my time to do that. And it came to the point where I was like, I can't just sit here and reply to every single one comment on social media. So I was thinking of compiling a group of educated responses with links and references, and just creating a web page, so that any one of us who can see these misconceptions on social media can just paste the link and be like, here's all the research done for you. So you don't have to go and research it for yourself. All of your questions, all of your accusations are answered here with statistics, links, data. That's what I'm going to be working on, because I don't know, I guess we're sick of explaining and defending ourselves. So I think making a web page, and then it's all here, guys. I know,
that's incredible. And when that happens, let me know. I will also just copy paste. Have you read this?
That's it.
I've never had a negative experience in conversation with an Indigenous person when I was, trying to be better. Like, every person has had so much patience and so much love to extend. And it's simply like, we just want equality. We just don't want to be killed. We just don't want to be stereotyped. And that's it. Like, it really doesn't have to be as hard as it is. And that's, I guess, what I find frustrating. So as an Indigenous woman who has had access to as much as you have all of the exposure and all of the experience. What are a couple, like 1, 2, 3 things that you wish white Australians knew about Indigenous culture?
Having grown up in Kempsey, where it is a very small community, and not living there now, but seeing, like, being a part of like social pages and things, or having friends that are still there that share these pages with comments that are saying that, like, Black people in Kempsey don't have jobs, or on the dole and things like that. For people that have that image of Indigenous people in small communities, I guess I just want them to realize that a lot of us, it's not the same group that stay and continue that. Like, my family is not from Kempsey, but they were my family, because all of my family were up in North Queensland. So all of the Indigenous people in Kempsey became my family. And all of us that have grown up there, they were including with my brother and everything, we're all racially profiled to have, no jobs, or that, uneducated, things like that. But we've all grown up and moved away, and from the top of my head, we have, between us, our occupations are like teacher, journalist, nurses, musicians, athletes, and I just want people to know that it may look like there's just this one group that consistently stays in one area and just does the same stereotypical things, because there are a handful of Indigenous people that fit the stereotype, but doesn't represent all of us. And a lot of us do get out, and we all have families now. We're all well off. We work hard for everything that we have. We're educated. And I suppose that's one thing I want people to know, is that, like, maybe to think, where are they now? If I could do a where are they now for all me and all of my friends, we would never have thought that we would be here. It was, well, actually mine was predictable because both of my parents are teachers, but like everybody else, I think, we all ended up, and we're all proud of where we ended up, especially after being accused of, like, having no lives or going nowhere with our life and doing nothing and just consistently being on the dole or something like that. But yeah, that's one thing. On social media, there's so many Indigenous people that have started their own, just become influencers, like personal trainers that really push for Indigenous communities and people to make better health choices, become healthy and active. Like, there's so many starting their own businesses. It's fantastic. And there's a lot of stuff that we're doing that never gets brought to light, really, though. Yeah, but another thing was, we don't get things for free. I can understand where people would think that we get things for free. I think it's been taken way out of context, and to the point where it just got scrunched up into the statement that we get things for free. But there's a few things that I would assume this is where it comes from. So people might be getting mixed up with native title, where Indigenous peoples of certain country areas win a lawsuit to get their land back, and just say, like, the mines or the gas company has their stuff running through a community or their land, then that nation or that country will get native title if they win it, which means they get a payout pretty much for rent of their land, and that's not everybody. It's a small community. Other things might be stolen wages. So, how I was mentioning my grandparents worked for free. So they're stolen wages. So that's the wages that they had earned that were never paid. So some families can go through a lawsuit and claim their grandparents' wages.
Wow. I had no idea that those two things existed.
Yeah, so they might be the payouts that people assume that everybody gets, like that we don't all get that. We don't have native title. We don't have my grandmother and grandfather never got a payout for their stolen wages. Another thing is we do get free flu vaccines. That's the only thing I can think of for flu. But that's because of the whole, like, we're more Indigenous people are more susceptible.
Yeah, that's not really
recovering. So we get free flu vaccines.
I wouldn't be throwing a tantrum about that.
Yeah. University, I've got a really big HEX fee that doesn't seem to be going down. That's definitely free. I wouldn't have needed to get an education to get a job if I had a house for free. I wouldn't even bother working. So, like, I didn't get my car for free. I've got a personal loan that I'm still paying off. And, so I think a lot of it comes from the payouts, and then they just see people getting all of this chunk of money, then they buy a car, then they buy a house, and they think, great, the government's giving them all of that. And so I think that's where the misconception comes from. I mean, there's AB study, which is studying if you're Indigenous, and then it's exactly the same as Oz study. I don't even know why they are called separate. Yeah, but it's the same payment for studying. Other things like Indigenous legal fees and that, I mean, is the equivalent is legal aid for anybody. There's always an equivalent if there's something. Like if the person's going to uni for free because they've got a scholarship, there's also scholarships available for non-Indigenous people. So yeah, it's like whatever's available to us is usually available to everybody else as well. Another thing, I guess, to let people know is that we're not trying to make white Australia feel guilty and say that it's your fault or anything. And we appreciate the people that support us, because that's all we want, is just the support. We're not saying, look what you did, say sorry to us again and again and again and keep making up for it. I suppose it's just acknowledging that it wasn't that long ago. Like, for instance, the fact that, had a middle class upbringing, I never went without, I never experienced, not having food on the table, or not having parents that can support me in my schoolwork, or not having access to the things that I do have, even technology and things like that. I've been very fortunate in my upbringing. And I'm one of the very few that can say that like I haven't experienced as much racism as I know others have. Like my brother has had a totally different experience to me. I don't know whether that's because I'm a lighter skinned than him or whether I'm a woman. Yeah, so that we're not blaming you guys, but to recognize that, you know, I'm actually fortunate to be only as on my Indigenous side. Like I'm fortunate to have gone to university, to have gotten education with in mind that my grandmother was a slave. Like it wasn't that long ago that my mum went to university and got a degree, being raised in on a mission. So they were all on a mission. She had 13 brothers and sisters, like 13 kids in their household. They would experience racial discrimination all the time. If you look up the Palm Island strike, my grandfather was one of the 7 freedom fighters, and they the police, like my mom remembers this stuff, like being broken, the police knocked in the doors, like held guns to their heads, because they were after my grandfather because he was fighting for their freedom to get off Palm Island, which was a mission. So it was a small island off the mainland, and they were saying we want to be free, like we just want to go back. They didn't even come from there. My grandmother got taken from Cairns and brought to Palm Island, which is just outside of Townsville. And my grandfather was taken from the Torres Straits and brought to Palm Island. But this wasn't even there, you know, and just the thought of this is where my grandparents, this was their life, and my mum grew up with that. And yet we still advanced really fast into educating ourselves, into getting ourselves, giving ourselves a voice and becoming that good role model for our children and wanting them to catch up and be up there with everybody else in the country, you know? So, and that's what, we don't want to blame anybody for what had happened, but we just like that acknowledgement that, hey, we're actually doing quite well, seeing as though like 2 generations ago, we were in chains. So, yeah.
And I guess I love metaphors, and I guess it comes down to like helping, not making the rebuild difficult, and helping where we can, like recognizing like I did not burn your house down, my grandparents did maybe, and like, man, that really sucks, and I'm so sorry, let me help you where I can, and if I can't help you, let me not make it harder for you.
Yeah, like just yeah, we don't expect you guys to like come in and physically help us, but just the acknowledgement that like, you know what, you guys, from where you had, like, it's just like, you know, starting a race, like, you know, you see those memes, not memes, they're like, I guess they're memes on social media where it's a cartoon and it's got like, you know, there's a race and everybody's in this lane, and then you've got one lane that has like all these obstacles in the way. Yes. You know, it's because, and it's like, it wasn't a fair race. We're still like where I am today with a lot of other non-Indigenous people, I am grateful for, because my grandmother would never have thought in her right mind that she would ever even be free, as someone who was like in her mid-20s, let alone go to university, get her own house, get her license, just simple privileges that I've been able to get, you know. So I think just the acknowledgement, like we're not asking to come and help in our communities and things like that, but that's fine also, we're not going to say no, but you know, just the fact that when we read comments on social media that say things like, oh, a bunch of lazy Aboriginals, or like typical no hopers, no lives, I'm one of the privileged ones, and then there's others that are my age whose parents really didn't have a job because their parents were illiterate and they couldn't, or they were too poor to send them to school, or they didn't have food, or they didn't have transport to get to school. So there's people my age who haven't had that privileged life of being able to get to where I am, because they have come from further disadvantaged backgrounds, you know. So I think that's another thing that just to know that we don't want to put blame on anyone, but we really appreciate just the support and just the acknowledgement that you guys can see where we've come from and where we are now. And that, yeah, that's why we just appreciate the support. And it's overwhelming when more and more each year I find are on board and are supportive, and it really does warm my heart, and I just feel really overwhelmed, I guess, like, And I see positive change just every year. I see some more positive change.
Yeah.
It might be a little bit, but it's something, and it's getting somewhere.
One last question I have for you. How can I, as your friend, as a white Australian woman with a platform, and anybody else who's watching this who maybe doesn't have a platform, how can I be a good ally?
Yeah, I mean, like I was just saying, I think it doesn't take much. It's as simple as just say, it's honestly as simple as just liking a comment that I've made in my defense on social media. That just something that simple makes me feel like I'm not the only one just standing around in a crowd full of everybody yelling at me, and I'm just trying to stand here saying like, guys, I just want this, and I'm not being attacked, so just honestly within the last week and all the comments I've been trying to make in our defense, just a like of my comment is the most simple and yet so supportive thing to say, or even just speaking up on behalf of us and reinforcing what we're saying. So like just saying things like, well, actually, for instance, the statistics of the deaths in custody, like I've seen so many posts, everything, sorry, I'm talking very social media here. So everything on social media, I mean, not everything, there's been posts that I've read that say, oh, the statistics aren't true, there's been no deaths in custody. There's more deaths of non-Indigenous people than Indigenous people in custody, and there've been natural deaths anyway, like Indigenous people. And I was thinking, I don't think you guys understand. And I did the calculations myself. I was like, it's the rate that we're talking about, the rate of deaths in custody compared to Indigenous people compared to non-Indigenous. So I did the figures myself. The Indigenous population is 3.3% of Australia's population. So when you look at 400 I can't remember the exact number, 424 or something, deaths in custody out of the population of Indigenous Australia compared to the deaths in custody, which is more, obviously, because there's more non-Australians.
Just per capita, It's like simple maths. And then it makes me angry that these educated people are making these really strong statements stating data and facts, but it's like, but you haven't done the calculations. You've just seen that this is how many deaths in custody for non-Indigenous and this compared to this Indigenous, but you haven't actually put them into the proper ratios. And if you look at that, we're actually dying at 3 times the rate of non-Indigenous. So like they haven't done the calculation. They've seen the figures, but calculation. And so like just little things like supporting that comment that I made and the research that I went through to give the answer. But then in the end, people just hear what they want to hear. So because that person didn't want to hear that, they just had some other nasty thing to say, and then I didn't bother wasting my time. So yeah, that's simple thing. We don't just, I mean, I didn't go to the protests because of COVID and things like that. And I am, wary of everybody's health and that. But like, if it wasn't COVID, I'd encourage 1,000%.
everybody. So
that
support like that is great. And I'm not saying also that like I hate everybody that went to the protest. Like I was there with everybody in spirit, and everything. But it's not much that we would ask or appreciate of. Making posts on your Instagram was, even if it's just like you say, one a day, or like not even one a day, just that one time is great. So I just thank you and appreciate that we have support and friends like you and people who even aren't our friends, people that we don't know. I always love everybody's comment.
And I think I hope and I pray that our generation is the one that once it knows better, it does better, because I think that's where the change happens. Thank you so much for spending the morning. I don't even know how long we've been talking, but thank you so much for spending time with me just to have a conversation and just to show that not knowing is okay, and approaching doesn't have to be, I don't have to approach with caution, not you, just the conversation and the topic. This isn't a time to be timid. This isn't a time to be silent because we don't want to be uncomfortable. I was not uncomfortable during this conversation at all. I think partly because we're friends, but also like it doesn't have to be uncomfortable or hard. Like it can just be like, hey, I was brought up with limited information, education, and there's a lot that I can learn, but one of the most valuable things that you can share with another person and receive from another person is a story.
A lot of Indigenous people will appreciate and love to talk about it.
Yeah.
If somebody asks, you know, like if they just said, you know, like a simple thing as like, what's your history? What's your story about your family and where'd you come from, or something like that. Just be ready for a hot cup of tea or something, because
yeah,
so long.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I had no idea that your grandparents were both slaves. Like, I think of my nana, and I love my nana. I could not imagine her as somebody who I call weekly having stories of being a slave like that. And obviously I will never have that experience, and that is a privilege, but I had no idea that it was as recent. I mean, I knew that it was recent, but I didn't have it like a personal connection, and now I do. I'm shook.
I know, and like I get emotional every time I watch and my girls, they like the movie Rabbit Proof Fence, and I cry because I think that's the exact thing that happened to my grandmother, and I can't even fathom it. Like, I cannot, because my daughters are those ages of those three girls, similar. Just the thought of someone just walking in here and just grabbing them all and then never see them again in my life, like, that overwhelms me. It makes me anxious, because they didn't even see it coming. They didn't prepare themselves for it. So it's just like my three girls getting taken out, and then they never saw each other again, and they never saw me or their dad or my mum and dad ever again. That's literally how it is. And I can't even begin to place myself in my great-grandmother's shoes, you know? It blows my mind, and I still feel like it's just a story or just a movie, but it's not. Like, even the stolen generation was still happening. Like, people were still being taken away from their families to live on missions up until like 1970 something, which was 3 years before my sister was born. My mum was 15 and kids were still being taken. Like, my mum was 15. It wasn't like my great-great-grandmother. And to me, it's hard to even believe that it was that recent, you know? And it wasn't until I'm an adult that I actually am doing this research myself and asking mum and dad as an adult conversation now, you know, with my parents, my aunties, and my grandmother only just passed away 4 years ago. She was the person that it actually happened to, you know, and it blows my mind to think that. I can't come to terms with how that is reality. But even like I grew up with mainly my Indigenous side of the family, because even when my mum and dad met, my grandparents on my dad's side didn't like my mum because she was black. So I never grew up or got to know my Australian side of the family. I think I met them when I was like 8 or something. It was very awkward because I was like, I don't know who these people are. And they were really like lovely and everything, but mum would never come because my grandmother hated her and told my dad that if they want to be together, then he can go away and like not live near them or visit them or anything. But
he was white and your grandmother was Indigenous. Oh, he was white and your mother
was...
No,
my dad is Irish. My dad's dad is Irish and my dad's mum is British Scottish.
Right.
So yeah, she was against it. But my grandfather, Irishman, he was lovely. Like, he would always make us feel welcome and comfortable and everything. But I think he just followed suit with his wife in regards to like not having my mum over and things like that. But even like that side of the family, still, like, I'll try to add them on Facebook. I don't know my cousins very well because we've just never kept contact. I don't get invited to weddings, or I don't know anybody on that side of the family anymore. We kind of grew up when we were about 8 to 10 years old. We all got along really, really well when we were all that age. And then we all kind of grew up. They all remained in touch, but I'm not in touch with them. I don't know whether they're like ashamed to have like a black cousin, or I don't know, honestly. Maybe it's because purely we didn't grow up together and they did. But I mean, I was wanting to reach out and, you know, add them on Facebook or just anything really, keep in touch. But yeah, I don't have any ties with that side of the family. But my grandmother, her heart has totally changed over these last like 10 years. My grandfather was dying of cancer, and I think her heart softened you know, over these years as well. And, you know, we're not really, really close, but she's making up for lost time. Like, she will always send us birthday cards or a little gift card voucher or Christmas cards. And I feel the love from her now, like, you know, and I appreciate that. I'm never going to be like, no, you weren't there for us before. You know, like, I really love that we've made that connection and bonded better now. So yeah, and she knows my children and she loves my kids, and so it's good in that way now. Yeah. But yeah, so thank you so much for all of these questions, because like I have never really discussed them with anyone, because usually the people I discuss them with know it because it's my family.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it's been good to be able to share that with a friend.
Yeah, I encourage anybody who's watching, any white Australian who's watching, or even white person I have a global network. And if you have a person of colour, or if you're in Australia, you have an Indigenous person that you know who you're friends with, but maybe not super close with, reach out and get to know their story, because I've learned so much about you, and I always respected and loved you anyway, but I feel like this was a necessary conversation to have with regards to me, like being a better friend, being a more present friend, and being a better and more present white Australian ally. So no matter where you are in the world, if you're white, then you have privilege, and just reach out and develop a connection and hear the story of somebody who you wouldn't normally identify within like life journey, because you and I have had very different upbringings, and like from where my parents and my grandparents have come from, entirely different. So sharing experiences and sharing stories, I think, is definitely how we create a better world. So thank you so much for your time and being so generous with you, sharing your experience. And I'm so excited when COVID is over to come and meet your bébé, because children are always so beautiful. I'm so grateful for this conversation.
Thank you for letting me be able to have this public conversation with you. I mean, for others to see, and I think it's important to share. And I just want to say I appreciate you, and I want to thank you for that as well.
Of course. So, oh, you're wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to say thank you 50 times, so I need to stop.
Half hour, because we don't know how to say goodbye. Yeah, I'm on maternity leave, so if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to.
Candace has time
to answer questions if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so excited for your website. I know you mentioned that you wanted to get into your community and help educate people in corporate spaces and in schools. Let me know how I can support you with that. Yeah, I'm really excited to just continue conversations offline as well. Yeah, encourage anybody who's watching just to like pick up the phone, or pick up like your phone and text or DM or whatever, and get to know people in your community that you wouldn't normally reach to learn about. Yeah, because it's so important. And yeah, my heart is warm. So thank you so much.